Hello, I'm James Naughtie, and we're going to discuss the outcome of Copenhagen and its implications. EcoBuild want to have an open debate on what happens after the climate change summit, which was seen in so many quarters as a failure, but which nonetheless leaves many countries still committed to progress towards what is called, in hope, a low-carbon world. I'm joined around the table here by Nick Rainsford, MP for Greenwich and Woolwich, Chairman of the Strategic Forum for Construction, a former construction minister, of course. On my left, by Mark Clare, who's Group Chief Executive of Barratt Developments plc, the biggest house builder in the country, by Keith Clark, alongside him, Chief Executive of Atkins, the largest engineering consultancy in the UK, and on my right here by Sunand Prasad, partner of Penoy & Prasad and an immediate past president of RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects. Nick Rainsford, let me begin with you. What is the significance for those in construction, in the house building and general building industry in this country, of what happened or didn't happen at Copenhagen?
Well, like most major international conferences, the hype in the immediate aftermath is not a good guide as to the reality. I think it was always unrealistic to expect a binding legal treaty. Nevertheless, there were genuine hopes that there would be further progress towards international agreement than has been reached. So it is a modest step forward, but it leaves the real bulk of the work still to be done, and it leaves countries like Britain that have already signed up to legally binding commitments to reduce carbon in a position where they have got to deliver, and they can use that to help persuade the rest of the world that they must catch up.
We'll return to that point. I want to know, for example, from the point of view of a house builder, whether what happened in Copenhagen made any difference. Mark Clare.
Well, no, it hasn't. I mean, we have very, very clear targets that have been set by the UK government to deliver low-carbon homes, new homes, and a pretty aggressive programme to actually look at existing homes as well. And to be honest, I think we've just got to continue to make progress against that.
Does that mean you think it doesn't matter that the objectives, as Nick Rainsford pointed out, haven't been met?
I mean, one of the concerns I have is that if we are doing it on our own as a country, then we are losing the opportunity to work with many other countries around the world who have exactly the same challenges and problems. And I think one of the big issues for us is we need innovation, we need technology, we need scale to solve these problems. And if we're the only country doing that, then that has to be of concern.
What I found shocking about Copenhagen wasn't so much that targets weren't set, because that was expected. It wasn't so much that the pleas of the most vulnerable nations were apparently ignored. And there are people, you must remember, who are now being affected by climate change. It's not something in the future for them.
It's not theoretical.
It's not theoretical. But what was really quite a big setback is a setback for science as an informant of policy. And the gap between the science that was on display in Copenhagen, very clearly, very rationally, risk-based, not alarmist, not predicting, but assessing risk and informing policymakers, the gap between that and what happened in the conference room was so extraordinary. Europe is by far the furthest ahead in terms of the population's acceptance. Even we complain about the UK population not being quite up to speed, but actually we are way ahead of many, many other countries.
Well, Keith Clark, from the largest engineering consultancy in the country, will we remain ahead if, as has been suggested, some of the steam may go out of the argument as a result of Copenhagen? Will we keep innovating? Will we keep developing?
I'd like to think the steam will start to build, because I think it was the least acceptable result you could get out of Copenhagen. But it was acceptable in the sense that, A, you had the world leaders concentrating on climate change when you've got the worst economic recession we've had for 50 years. That kind of tells you where the priority is.
That's bottom line stuff. I mean,
that's really important,
yes.
Okay? That they turn up when they've all got massive unemployment, and like this country, more unemployment coming this year. So voters going home with no job. That's serious. And they're at Copenhagen.
Well, do you share that optimism, Nick Rainsford?
I always take the view that these international conferences can only be properly assessed several years after the event.
And they're never as good or as bad as they seem.
Well, no, but if we take Kyoto as an example, at the time of Kyoto, those who were engaged defended it and said this was the most important seminal moment in the world's history because at last there was an agreement, something had to be done. Those who looked at, for example, the fact that the United States weren't engaged at all said this is useless and a disaster. The reality now, judging it several years on, is that Kyoto helped It moved things forward to a degree, but it wasn't sufficient. And I think people will say the same about Copenhagen.
And there is Mexico in a year's time.
Yes, which is very important. Mexico in a year's time. The issue is, do people start working on Mexico now?
And the key issue is whether people have the appetite to actually turn out in the way that they have done for Copenhagen in a year's time.
Appetite is a fascinating word. I mean, there are all kinds of appetites. There's the appetite of the leaders to do it again. There's also the appetite of the public. Now, as a house builder, when you argue, look, we've got to move fast towards a different kind of way of building and a different kind of way of dealing with existing stock, do you think you'll have the public with you?
I think it will grow over time. I think if we look at where we are today, I would say there's clearly an understanding that this is something that needs to change. Is there an acceptance that a new home will cost substantially more, or indeed that you have to contribute a substantial amount for your existing home to be made more energy efficient? I don't think that's there today. So I think this is where we probably need policy change to actually start to make that happen.
Nick Rainsford, do you believe that people broadly have accepted the case for a change in the way we live?
Not fully, by any means. There's still a tendency to say, well, I know this is a problem, but I don't think me taking a flight is going to make that much difference, so I'm going on my holiday, on my holiday by air, as always. There's that degree. Nevertheless, picking up Mark's point, I think there have been very significant moves in the last few years, partly driven by government regulation, partly driven by the house building industry's acceptance that they've got to produce higher quality, more energy efficient homes. And a lot of the homes being built today, the new homes, are extremely good. Now, getting that little bit extra to the 2016 target of zero carbon is extremely difficult and very expensive. But we shouldn't in any way underestimate what's been achieved so far. But Mark is quite right to say that's got to be translated into the existing housing stock.
We are presenting, and this conversation sort of slightly shows it, the challenge of climate change as quite a hair-shirt business, you know, that we've got to spend all this money, take all this, change our lifestyles and so on and so forth. I think the news is that this is a fantastic adventure and opportunity to trigger extraordinary innovation, live healthier and better lives. And, you know, the biggest message that I think we fail to get across is that this is not about only a great financial burden. It's primarily a cash flow problem. It's actually going to show positively on the profit and loss account in the long term and the balance sheet, and indeed pay dividends. And if we can sort out the cash flow issue, it's really not a zero-sum game. It is a win-win, as they say in the jargon.
In the engineering business, are people now grasping the, as Sunand would put it, the adventure rather than the pain?
I think we're just at the edge. And I think the whole change in the way we run utilities, the way we regulate them, the way we work with government, is at that point where there is a real opportunity for a different relationship.
Could it go backwards?
It would be difficult for it to go backwards, because if it did, we would have a failing economy. And let's be clear, the way out of our recession is not for us to do nothing. The way out of society to stay at home. And I think Sunad's right. This is not a hair-shirt issue. It's a way of taking forward society with jobs, with people still going to the theatre and meeting people in cities and being productive. And we're still going to travel. Yeah. It's a very vibrant, but it's a revolution. It's not what we've done before.
The key to a successful emergence out of the current recession with the low carbon agenda high in people's minds is for all of those who know the scope for really changing processes with new technology, with new systems, with new ways of doing things that actually minimize carbon. That case is well presented and well argued. And if so, we will be able to say, we look back at this recession which ended the last period of high carbon growth that the world will ever see.
Copenhagen or no Copenhagen. Nick Rainsford, Keith Clark and Mark Clare, Sunand Prasad, thank you very much.